Barbara, you spent some time with Professor James Anaya, the United Nations Special Rapporteur, who came over for 11 to 12 days, and he travelled around, and you had a personal meeting with him. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what your thoughts about it were? And
I was lucky enough to host his visit back home in Alice Springs. I was told that he needs to hear both sides of the arguments on how people advocate for human rights in Australia and also in the Northern Territory. The next day he went out to Yuendamu, which is a community about 350 kilometres northwest of Alice Springs. And in that community they just welcomed him, and they just welcomed him in language and just chanting welcome in their language. And they also had articles of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples all over the community. So he was pretty pleased with that. One of the things that he went to the community school, and he's seen how they do their own story writings in their own language in the schools, and they teach their kids language in school. So he was pretty pleased to see that we still maintain our culture through language. And then when you look at the treaties that the Australian government has signed up to the United Nations, those treaties are actually, they're not so much binding by law yet, but then if it was, they wouldn't be able to do the things that they do to people, let alone, Indigenous peoples. You got the Australian government say, yeah, we'll do this under the human rights treaties, but then they really don't. And I think that's where Australia needs to be shamed in everything. People look to us, international or other countries look to Australia and say, oh, what a good country Australia is. But then when you actually live in it and then have to live by all the laws and policies and regulations, they're not doing the right thing. They don't even protect any individuals, especially Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islander people. And when they're suspending the Racial Discrimination Act and putting out a policy just for Aboriginal people, that's got to be wrong, and people should be standing up about that. With the Racial Discrimination Act, it has been suspended 3 times, and every time they've suspended it, it's involved Aboriginal people. The first one was in South Australia, in Adelaide for the Hindmarsh Bridge, where they actually built a bridge over a women's sacred site. The second time was, in fact, over the amendments to the Land Rights Act. And then the third for the intervention.
Barbara, you were here in April. You gave a talk at Melbourne University, and John Pilger was here at the same. He was at the same event. During John Pilger's talk, he the first question that was given to him was about his idea of heroes, and he specifically referred to you as a hero as well. In knowing that now, do you see yourself as that, or where do you see yourself in this, and what keeps you going?
Well, what keeps me going? I guess I was brought up around that environment, and because of the role also my father played within campaigning for land rights, and also he was one of the first founders of Tungunjura Council and setting up the housing associations, and I actually live in the very first house that was built on our camp, which was acquired in 1974. And the house that I live in was built in 1977. So, and just seeing the old people fighting for what they've got today, and just the campaigns around environment, land rights, organisations, you know, help set up organisations. So I guess it was always in me to do that because I grew up with it. And I thought of my children and thinking, you know, that they're going to be living under this kind of government and being controlled by them for the rest of their lives. And then I was thinking about my 72-year-old grandfather who in 1988 got native title for our country up at Barra Creek in Kadich country. So, and my great-grandfather was alive then, so I watched him sign his little cross, you know, when he couldn't write his name. I was actually sitting right next to him when he was doing it. And I just thought, you know, this old man must have died, you know, passed away well into hundreds, you know, but nobody knew his birth date or when he was born. And he was one of the last surviving families of the Kadich massacre that happened up around Barra Creek. Forget what date, but yeah, they spread out, you know, all ran across to Alyawara country, up to Warramunga country, and then further northwest into Walpri country. So yeah, he was one of the last surviving peoples of that massacre. And just for Aboriginal people to come so far and achieve what they've got now is, I guess, what keeps me going. And all those people in remote communities, you know, all my family that don't really speak English properly and wouldn't understand the legislation. And, you know, I know that all my aunties and uncles and my nanas and grandpas that are still alive out bush, they look after all their kids, you know. And they grew up their kids with culture, with language, knowing country, and they don't know anything about pornography or pedophiles, you know. And I just thought, you know, how can you spend so much money, or the government spend at least $40,000 putting up a sign in front of our prescribed areas and, you know, saying, you know, warning, prescribed area, no liquor or alcohol and no pornography or no prohibited materials, and you think, would old people know that, or, you know, would they understand them words? And I guess that's what kept me going for the last 2 years, is that people who don't know should know. So you know, did the legislation bit, went through it with a couple of people, which then I started to work with our little action group in Alice Springs, the Intervention Rollback Action Group. Started going through the legislation, and then we'd explain that to people who don't know anything, you know. I know that when I first met Jenny Macklin, she asked for evidence-based reports. So when we went back home after Canberra, Convergence on Canberra 08, that's when we started doing rallies rallies outside Centrelink, mainly getting information and doing surveys, because that was one of our way of getting evidence-based reports for her. And so we'd just do these surveys every month. We'll compile it and send her a report, and it still didn't work. Still didn't take any notice. And to this day, she still don't take any notice.
If you could be broadcast in everyone's homes on television or in so that you could get to everyone, what would you say to Australians, the whole population, about what's happening?
Oh, what I'd say, more lies and broken promises. there are a lot of people not being listened to. And I'm one of those people who are affected by the intervention. I look after myself. I look after my children. Please listen to me and my plea. There are a lot of women in my situation where they do provide for their families and they do look after their children.
Thank you very much, Bob.
You're very welcome.